Good morning, everybody. I'm Katie Moore. I'm the CEO of the Virginia Funders Network. We're so glad that you've joined us this morning for our session one of our Broadband Learning Series. This is a really important topic, very timely for Virginia. We've got a great panel lined up for you today to dig into this topic and what philanthropy's role is and what the opportunity in Virginia is. I want to first just tell you a little bit about VFN. Many of you are actively involved with the Virginia Funders Network, but for those of you who this might be your first meeting, the Virginia Funders Network is a membership association for philanthropy in Virginia. And we are working, this is our first year in operations, and we're working in three buckets right now. One is to really build a solid foundation for our brand new organization. We've got an incredible 18-member advisory board. We've got a lovely and growing staff. Thanks to Patty Koval for all of her great work putting this together. And we're also just building up our infrastructure, our communications. We've got a beautiful new logo. We've got a great new mission statement and vision statement. And also, I hope everyone saw the announcement of our brand new website and that you've been able to visit and poke around a little bit there. So that's our solid foundation that we're working to build. The second thing is we're working to build a really vibrant network of philanthropy in Virginia. We have 100 funders across the state who have joined our network. We've hosted over a dozen learning opportunities for philanthropy so far this year already, including our 5 networking groups. We have a group for community foundations, and we have 4 issue-based groups for education funders, health funders, housing funders, and social justice funders. So if you haven't had an opportunity to get involved with one of those groups, please make sure you're paying attention to the newsletter and also checking the website. We've got an upcoming events calendar where you can register for those events and those groups. And the final bucket is really around leveraging the power of this network. Now that we have 100 funders under one roof, what can we do together? And today's session is one example of the ways that philanthropy can work together with government and other sectors to really expand opportunities across the Commonwealth. We had our American Rescue Plan toolkit that we released earlier this year to help philanthropy work with local elected officials as they were making, or I guess are making, allocations for American Rescue Plan dollars in local communities. We've had 7 legislative briefings already this year to help philanthropy really understand what's going on at the state and local levels. And we've signed on to a joint letter to Congress already to make sure that any legislation that might be passed at the federal level that involves philanthropy or a nonprofit community includes our voice in the shaping of that policy. So we are so excited about the power and potential of having philanthropy work together in Virginia. And we know that this is the biggest opportunity. This bucket, this leverage and leadership bucket is really the most potential that we have as a funders network. So thank you to everyone who supported our work so far. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Wayne Waldrop from Virginia Community Capital, who's going to moderate today's panel and introduce our speakers. Take it away, Wayne.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. First, let me say thank you to the Virginia Funders Network for hosting this. It's a pleasure for me to moderate the panel. I don't consider myself an expert the way the panelists are, so I'm looking forward to learning along with everybody that is participating in this webinar. My name is Wayne Waldrop. I am President and Chief Lending Officer for Virginia Community Capital. VCC is a Virginia-based community development financial institution that is very much linked with a lot of the objectives of the participants in this call today. We are interested in improving the quality of life of all Virginians, and we do that a lot of times through capital solutions, and that varies from direct loans to indirect loans from time to time. We have a real estate lending group as well as a small business lending group, and I'm also manage the Community Innovations Group. As it relates to this topic, there are times when VCC can finance various gaps in funding with the help of a locality or a regional group and even foundations. So we're delighted to be playing a role in the solution here. I want to introduce our speakers. I'm going to kind of start in the middle of this slide with Adrianne Furniss. Adrianne is the Executive Director of the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. And she was mentioning earlier that her organization is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. So she is not a newcomer to this topic. I think her father actually started the foundation decades ago when, I guess, Adrianne, it was cell phones and kind of basic telecommunications coming down the pike at that point, and her organization has been very involved in access and equity for many years, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what the broadband issue is, and then we're going to hear from our other two speakers, and Adrianne is going to come back in and talk a little bit about how philanthropy may play a role. We're going to hear from Dr. Tamarah Holmes with DHCD. She represents one of the large pots of money to help fix this big problem. And I know Tamarah is in the process now of working with a lot of localities who are applying for grants. Her state agency, the Department of Housing and Community Development, I was thinking, Tamarah, the other day that, you know, you guys have been talking about the last mile for years, trying to get access to the last mile, and it's really almost the last inch. It seems like the problem and the challenge is to get it down to that level. So you guys are playing a huge role in administering federal government money, and we'll hear from Tamarah in just a minute. Evan Feinman is the Executive Director for the Tobacco Commission. Most of you are probably familiar with the Tobacco Commission. It's really an economic development institution or group that helps largely rural communities in Southside and Southwest Virginia. The rural communities do represent some unique challenges when it comes to broadband access. And Evan is going to talk a little bit about how the Tobacco Commission can help in that process. We do have, again, our purpose for today is understand a little bit about the context of this problem. Adrianne's going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about some pots of money that are available, both at the federal, state, and I guess kind of quasi-state private level, including folks like me and Virginia Community Capital. And then we're going to come back and have Adrianne talk about how can philanthropy play a role in this process. So it's a great opportunity for us to learn, and I think more importantly, an opportunity for us to collaborate together in the future, because I think it's really going to take all of us to try to really address this problem. At the end, there will be time for question and answers. We're going to take roughly an hour for presentations, and then we'll have about 30 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll hopefully be wrapped up by 11:30 or so. So are there any questions at this point? Katie or Patty, do you guys have anything before we get started, before Adrianne kicks us off?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay, Adrianne.
Well, good morning. Thanks so much, Wayne, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Katie and Patty, for inviting me to speak to the Virginia Funders Network about the power of broadband. So before I set the stage for our other speakers, I've actually been asked to give you a basic broadband 101. And so, Robbie, great, thank you. Broadband refers to how we connect to the internet. It's a shorthand for an always-on, high-speed connection provided by what's called an internet service provider. We say always on to differentiate contemporary broadband connections from those of the 1990s, when some of you may remember, a user had to dial a telephone number through the computer to connect. So currently, as this slide illustrates, there are 6 ways that people can access broadband, but we're going to focus on the bottom tier, which is called wireline or fixed broadband, meaning a wire delivers service into a home or business. Now, speed is pretty important when we talk about broadband, because when we talk about speed, we're really getting at the capacity of a connection to handle more and more of our digital lives. Now, unfortunately, the federal agency charged with regulating telecommunications, the Federal Communications Commission, has not updated the speed benchmark for broadband in over 5 years. And this speed is inadequate for multiple people in the same household to use video conferencing tools for work and school at the same time, as we learned in this past year and a half. But there is a wide disparity of speeds available. If you subscribe to broadband through a cable company, such as Comcast or AT&T, which is available particularly in high-density urban areas, most of you would get 4 times the speed standard set by the Federal Communications Commission. So let's be clear, not all broadband is created equal. Fiber is considered the gold standard of broadband connections. It's incredibly fast and can handle a near unlimited amount of data and users. But the problem is, and it's a problem for deploying all wireline broadband networks, is that they are expensive to lay down. And as such, many companies do not want to invest in deployment without a guaranteed return on investment, something that's difficult to achieve in rural America. So we at Benton don't advocate for broadband as an end in itself. Instead, we say the transformative power of broadband lies in its ability to connect users to solutions. It's about broadband's promise to deliver education, healthcare, economic equality, and civic engagement to everyone. And this promise and our failure to deliver on it has been made even more apparent during the pandemic. So I think that these pandemic pictures on the next slide are worth 1,000 words. At the top right is a family in rural Georgia who drive 20 miles each way to access Wi-Fi at the Chick-fil-A, so the 4 kids in this van with their laptops can do their homework. In the lower right is a student in Las Vegas who's doing his coursework thanks to a bus that provides Wi-Fi. And finally, here's a family on Golden Pond in New Hampshire struggling with internet connectivity. So when you see these pictures, you might ask, whose job is it to deliver broadband to everyone in the US? Is it the job of private internet service providers who are focused on shareholder return? Is it the job of the government? Or is it some combination? So the idea of universal service is enshrined in federal laws going back to 1934 and re-articulated again in 1996. Robbie, next slide. The laws, I think, there you go. The laws outline principles that guide universal service policy. Based on these principles, a variety of programs and funding mechanisms help ensure networks reach everywhere, that schools, libraries, and rural healthcare facilities can connect, and that the most vulnerable, low-income households can afford service. So there are a lot of good people at the federal, state, and local levels that feel it is their job to promote and uphold the principles that guide universal service. But the question you may be asking is, if these principles have been around for decades, then why haven't we solved these problems? Well, we have to a degree. Phone service, the dominant technology of the last 100 years, is now nearly ubiquitous. I think it's 98% of the United States. But the introduction of new technologies and the crush of new societal challenges means it sometimes feels like one step forward and two steps back. After 2.5 decades, broadband is unavailable or is still unaffordable for millions of Americans. Next slide. So I love this slide, though it's really shows the stark realities of digital disparity. And obviously, as mentioned before, they've never been clearer than during the pandemic, when too many people were unable to access jobs, learning, healthcare, and government services. And this is the tragedy that is known as the digital divide. So on the left-hand side, you see a slide that talks about or shows you where the 14.5 million people who don't have access at home. That just literally means they don't have a hardwire connection. But on the other side, this is about the 120 million people. It's about 36% of this country who do not use the internet at broadband speeds greater than or equal to the federal benchmark. And so we ask ourselves, what is the state of the digital divide in the US if 36% of people are not using this tool? So for some, as you can see, it's really about broadband networks not being available at any price. But in too many areas, commercial providers have determined there is no return on their investment to build. Most often, people assume that this is a problem in less densely populated rural areas, and that's true with almost 16% of people who lack access to fixed broadband. Also, less than half of the households on rural tribal lands have access to fixed broadband. Next slide, Robbie. But let's not think that all urbanites have broadband. From a sheer numbers perspective, there are almost 3 times as many people without broadband in urban and metro areas than in rural areas. And the key issue is cost. The price that we pay for broadband is the 3rd highest in the world. But our research shows that in low-income households, $10 to $15 per month is the most low-income households can afford to pay for broadband without sacrificing other necessities. And 37% of non-broadband users cite the cost of a computer as one of the reasons they do not have broadband at home. So communities of color, low income and rural Americans are far more likely not to use broadband than are whites and people with higher incomes. So there's more to the digital divide than access and cost. Next slide, please. 1/3 of people who don't subscribe to broadband say they lack the skills they need, like setting up an email account or installing security measures. Cities and states with racial and geographic disparities in health and economic status face a stark decision. Should broadband become just another marker of racial and geographic inequity, or should we make the choice to support and empower low-income communities and rural and tribal areas through equal access to affordable broadband and the digital skills to use it? So I think everybody realizes that this is an historic moment when our efforts are needed more than ever to achieve digital equity, and that starts with building better broadband networks in communities. As everyone knows, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the high cost of communities being offline and the federal government has invested billions and is poised to invest billions more dollars to address the problem. But people and communities need additional resources to shape these dollars, to plan long-term, to ensure their interests are represented in the discussion. And that's our job at the Benton Institute, plus the job of Evan and Tamarah, who you're going to hear from. So over our 40-year history, and Wayne, we like to tell people that we were around after the first PC was invented, literally a year after. So that
Nice.
is that's really going back. But anyway, next slide, Robbie. Our, oh, whoops, I think I missed one. Next one after that, there we go. So over our 40-year history, our work has taken the long view, and we have helped to envision a public interest focused broadband policy agenda that champions fast, fair, open broadband for all. So in 2020, actually right on the cusp or sort of into the pandemic, 6 months into the pandemic, we released this national policy agenda called Broadband for America Now. And we really wanted to urge policymakers to start addressing at-home internet access as a civil rights emergency in need of a comprehensive solution. So we proposed an integrated strategy which articulated the need for leaders at all levels of government to embrace 4 building blocks of policy to close the digital divide. And you can see what those are: digital equity, deployment, competition, which of course is why prices are so high, lack of competition, and the importance of community leaders and community anchor institutions. Next slide, Robbie. So on this, we say President Biden and many of us on this call would agree that we can't build back better without broadband. So during his presidential campaign, Biden articulated 4 policy priorities: to beat back COVID-19, to spur economic recovery, to address racial equity, and to fight climate change. And he discusses broadband's role in each of these areas, whether it's delivering telehealth, jobs through construction of networks as part of an infrastructure package, digital literacy training and affordability to close the digital equity gap, which disproportionately affects rural and tribal communities and communities of color, and applications for farmers to more sustainably manage their land and inputs, and for cities to implement smart grid technology. Next slide. So there are a bunch of federal agencies that deal with this issue. I've talked about the Federal Communications Commission, but 3 other key federal agencies are the Department of Commerce's National Telecommunications and Information Administration. You're going to hear a lot about that if the infrastructure bill passes. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, and recently a new player on the block distributing $10 billion is the U.S. Department of Treasury. Next slide. So I think all of you have heard about, and I know Tamarah and Evan are going to talk about this major COVID-19 relief legislation that has been introduced in the last year and has included billions for broadband access and affordability. And I won't go over the slide. Maybe Katie and Patty will distribute the slides to you afterwards. But the most important thing from my perspective, and something Benton has fought for a long time, is making sure that broadband is affordable so we can achieve universal service. So this emergency broadband benefit program has been something introduced, and the new infrastructure bill would actually add money to the kitty to make sure that that subsidy could reach more people, not only low income, but those who might have had their incomes affected specifically by the COVID-19 pandemic. So one of the things that we talk about broadband is there is obviously a connection between state, local, and federal efforts. And federal funding needs to be fused with more trusted state, tribal, and local leadership, because these guys are the ones that have a better understanding of their political and economic environments, their local health threats, their resource levels, and their broadband usage needs. And they have relationships with internet service providers on the ground. And so states, next slide, Robbie, are finding innovative and creative ways to advance their broadband goals. And they've stepped up with comprehensive approaches that include funding and stakeholder outreach, capacity building, and program evaluation and partnerships. So just here are a few headlines, including a relatively recent Governor Northam announcement about the 700 million, but I think we're up to 1 billion. So I know that that's a lot of money, and I think maybe the largest state fund yet. I'm sure I'll be either confirmed or corrected by my fellow speakers. And so next slide, Robbie. And the states are going to actually have even more power if the infrastructure before Congress passes. So they're talking about another 65 billion available to ensure universal high-speed internet access, and 42 billion of that would pass through that Department of Commerce agency that I mentioned before. It would go right to the states, who would then make decisions about broadband expansion. So you're blessed in Virginia because you're organized to receive those funds. And I will say that a lot of states are not necessarily as organized as Virginia is. There's a lot of scrambling by many of us at the national level to help states that aren't in the position that Virginia is. So at this point, I want to turn it over. I don't know who's speaking first, Evan or Tamarah, Wayne or Katie, who was supposed to be up next?
I think it's Tamarah, isn't it?
Okay, yep, okay, go on. Tamarah, thank you so much. Robbie will run your slides, and I'm looking forward to your talk. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm actually gonna not do my slides yet. I'll let Evan go. We typically tag team. So
Okay.
Evan, would you mind actually going first and kind of setting the framework around policy, and then I'll go over our program side of it, if you don't mind.
Happy to do it. I think that's a great plan, Tamarah. Well, first, thank you everybody for having me. There's somebody revving their engine loudly outside my office, so I apologize for that. It's really exciting to be here and talk to all of y'all. I wear two hats. And so, you know, the first job that I had was as director of the executive director of the Tobacco Commission. For folks who are unfamiliar, very briefly, we don't sell cigarettes or regulate cigarettes. Rather, it's an economic development organization focused on Southern and Southwest Virginia, funded out of the settlement with the tobacco companies for lying about the health impacts of smoking. Through that organization, we invested a little over 130 million in broadband networks over the last decade, some middle mile, some last mile. And that work led fairly directly to my second role, which I continue to run the Tobacco Commission, but under Governor Northam, I've also been his chief broadband advisor. When we think about broadband, there's really two big sides to the digital divide. You can think of them as each sort of side of the cliff. One is access. That's the question of whether or not you actually have infrastructure available to you at your place of home or business that allows you to get online at any price. And there are hundreds of thousands of people in Virginia and millions in this country who still, no matter their income level, cannot get online at any realistic speed. The second question is affordability. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's, does your household have adequate resources to take service on the infrastructure that's available to you at your home? Affordability is the more complex problem, but we can attack it moving forward with a variety of different policy approaches. Happy to talk about those later. A lot of them are pretty reliant on new changes to federal programs. There has not to date been much appetite at the state level for ongoing subsidization or other affordability programs that might work. But we've got some really interesting openings right now. And in fact, we're running a pilot and writing a report through the Department of Social Services in Virginia on the affordability side. But on the access side, I really want to talk about where we've gotten and broadly frame where Virginia was and where Virginia is going. When Governor Northam came into office, he set the goal of universal broadband access no later than 2028. That was a goal he set in 2018, so it was a 10-year goal. We knew right out of the gate that this was a necessary undertaking for all the things that Adrianne laid out for you. It's an economic necessity. It's a political demand. We also believe really strongly that it's a moral and equitable imperative, that in fact, we owe it to Virginians that if they're going to live the same quality of life that we expect minimally all Virginians to have, they must have access to the internet. So we got to work right away, and we scoped the problem. We determined that after contending with some complex data issues related to the way in which broadband network coverage is reported by the telecom industry, we were able to estimate that there were right around 660,000 Virginians at right around 500,000 locations that did not have access to broadband connectivity. Working with Tamarah and the rest of the team, we were able to put together a program that even before the pandemic had already supported projects that connected around 108,000 Virginia homes and businesses. And that's a big deal, guys. We like broadband connectivity in Virginia before COVID made it cool. That was 108,000 homes and businesses that were able to teleeducate, engage in telehealth activities. It was a really huge accomplishment. We've since then connected even more folks, with state programs having connected more than 140,000 folks. And we're really just getting started. We have taken this to the next level. That was with right around $100 million deployed total. During the last special session of the General Assembly this summer, we were able to secure another $700 million in ARPA dollars to go alongside the already budgeted $50 million state dollars, and a forthcoming $100 million in state funds in the outgoing biennial budget that Governor Northam will introduce. With this total of $850 million, which may be the largest of any state in the union, that's one of those facts that's too good to check. We believe that will be sufficient to get Virginia to universal coverage ahead of our previous deadline. So we've accelerated our previous deadline, and we will now have projects fully engineered, approved, and underway by 2024, which is incredibly exciting. We're very confident that will make us the first large state in the union to get to universal broadband coverage. I don't give Delaware and Rhode Island a ton of credit. It's certainly good that the greater Providence suburbs have broadband access, but it's not quite the same undertaking as what we're doing here in Virginia. We're gonna reach that universal coverage during the next 4 years, but there's still a great deal of work to be done between now and then. Our most recent grant round closed, and Tamarah is gonna give you the details on that, but really broad strokes, almost $950 million in requested funds, leveraging right around $1.2 billion in private and local capital. The challenge that we've got is we can only do so much on the state side. So we still need significant support from local governments and support to local governments. So when we talk about philanthropy and funders, that's why this network and the folks who are here today are critically important. Our program that Tamarah is going to lay out the details of requires that communities bring their own resources to the table and put some of their own skin in the game. That is very, very challenging for some of our low resource communities. We can, and Tamarah has incredibly talented planners and grant managers and project developers on her team. But at the same time, we know that when you go to some of the lower resource counties, you know, the public works director is the economic development director is answering the phone 2 days a week. There simply isn't enough capacity in those communities unless they can get some outside help so they can pick up their half or even their third of the project that needs doing, because we can't lead, you know, we're in Richmond and somebody does have to project manage these partnerships between ISPs and communities on the community side to make sure that communities actually get the outcomes that they deserve from the projects that we fund. Really briefly, the way we're getting this done, Tamarah is going to talk about grant making that solves the fundamental math problem that underlies the digital divide. Second, we do local planning support. Again, that's focused on Tamarah's team. And then third, we improve state policy. We've made a ton of really big changes to the way we do things within the executive branch And we've made a lot of changes legislatively in partnership with the General Assembly. All of that's really important. I'm happy to get into details of that too, but I don't want to take up everybody else's time or the Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to my partner in providing benefit as opposed to crime, Dr. Tamarah Holmes.
Thank you, Evan. And Robbie, if you can put my slides back up. All right, next slide. You can go ahead to the next one. All right, so as Evan talked about earlier, broadband connectivity is a top priority for Governor Northam and his administration. And Evan talked a little bit earlier how our goal has actually been accelerated. It used to be a 10-year goal, which started in 2018, and now the goal has been accelerated to 2024, right around the time I can retire officially from state government. So we do have so we do have about 233,500 remaining unserved locations. And our goal of universal coverage, again, was no later than 2028. And as Adrianne and both Evan talked about, we've had significant investment in Virginia of American Rescue Plan funds by the governor and General Assembly. Thank you. And now we're going to try to get this goal done, as Evan said, with the funds being committed and projects underway by 2024. Next slide. So the Office of Broadband, we are officially, I think we're now 2 years old. But as Evan said, we've actually had the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative since 2017. And the Office of Broadband, as Evan talked a little bit about earlier, we do have a full complement of staff that works with communities from A to Z. One, we assist communities with broadband planning efforts. And a shout out to my team, they're actually on the webinar this morning. And then we do provide technical assistance to a variety of stakeholders on not just only accessing body funding, but accessing tribal and federal broadband programs. As Adrianne talked about earlier, there's a whole host of federal programs that are providing funding, whether it's through the FCC and whether it's through NTIA. So we work very closely with any stakeholder within Virginia who's trying to seek access to those funds. And then our biggest job is to administer the body program, which we provide both technical assistance before someone comes in with an application and then once they receive funding. And then we do manage the grant funds once they're awarded. And the newest responsibility that we inherited is oversight of the state broadband map. Just to give you a little preview, we actually will be building a new state broadband map. We're in the process of doing that with Virginia Tech. And if you want more information, I can share that with the Virginia Funders Network, and we can share with you our guidelines. We actually just opened our guidelines for public comment, and we plan on having a new state broadband map by April 1st of 2022. So as I say all the time, we're going to beat the FCC to developing a new broadband map. Next slide. So VODI is our largest broadband infrastructure program. And as Evan said earlier, I think we might be the largest in the union in terms of how much money we have between the ARPA funding, which I'll talk about shortly, and then our state allocation through the General Assembly. In our program, we do require a public-private partnership, so there must be a unit of local government must apply in partnership with an internet service provider. And by units of local government, we mean a school district, a county, a town, a city, any entity, a planning district commission, which we've seen a lot of those in the last round of our grant cycle, must partner with the internet service provider. Our applications are under review right now. And every county and city submitted a notice of application. We do have a two-step process within the Commonwealth for seeking funding. We have a notice of application requirement that basically says some folks are interested in applying, and then we actually identify which communities we will provide technical assistance to apply for our program. Evan likes to say that our body application process is an open book test. So we actually work with communities as they're preparing the applications to provide feedback as they're making it through the process. And our application officially closed on September 14th of this year. Next slide. So just to give you guys an understanding of both the impact and demand and what we've seen over the last couple of years from VODI, as Evan talked about earlier, the state has actually invested over $100 million in broadband over the last 10 years. However, through VODI, which has been around since 2017, we received 145 applications, over 166 million has been requested, $74 million in funding have been awarded just through VODI, and then $86 million have actually been leveraged. So every investment of VODI dollar, we've actually leveraged $1.2. connecting over 78,035 connections. And that's 47 projects across 56 localities. Now, since the pandemic, and this is actually our first official round that we've had since COVID happened. We did have a round in spring of 2021, but that was at the beginning of the pandemic. And since then, we've actually received in this round, and remember when we started this application process, we had $50 million, and then Governor Northam made the announcement in July, and it went to 750. So we had 57 applications requesting from 84 localities. Well, guys, there are 95 counties in Virginia. So just want to lay that for you. And then, as Evan said earlier, $943.3 million requested. I've been practicing saying that number. I actually can say the entire number. I told him I feel like I'm in an Austin Powers movie every time I talk about how much money has been requested and how much has been leveraged, and 1.2 billion leveraged in funding. So next slide. So Adrianne talked about the American Rescue Plan, and we actually have both state fiscal recovery funds and what is called the capital project funds now invested in our body program. Governor Northam and the General Assembly approved $700 million in ARP funding to expedite our deployment program from going from 2028 to 2024. And that's actually split between both the American Rescue State Fiscal Recovery Funds and the Capital Project Fund. And then we actually decided that we would run at least this portion of the funding through the body program for this round. And as I said earlier, the applications are currently under review. And as what was said earlier by Evan, local and private funding are key to applications being competitive. So organizations like the Virginia Funders Network is very important, and philanthropy is very important with helping those low resource communities be able to be competitive coming in for body funding. Next slide. So with that, that actually concludes my portion of the presentation, and I think am I kicking it back over to you, Adrianne?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So everybody, that's really great. And as I said, there's just an extraordinary effort going on in Virginia, and I really commend Evan, Tamarah, and their teams. But I think the question that's been raised by this call is, you see these billions of dollars coming down, and you might say, so what's the role that philanthropy can play? And so I do, we've made a list here of some things that we're aware of that have been going on around the country. And I wanted to just highlight a few specifics for you where we've seen philanthropy play a role. And sorry, I'm going to get my, there we go. So as Evan and Tamarah and Wayne actually alluded to, there is a role for community-based organizations, lending organizations, and philanthropy to help offset costs or provide matching funds to support this public-private partnership that has been set up in Virginia. And I believe that there's a role also for philanthropy to do things that that philanthropy is very good at, which is to convene key stakeholders and working groups, either locally, regionally, or at the state level, to support education and advocacy efforts, and to support mapping and data collection. So I can speak, Robbie and I are actually based in Illinois, but Illinois has done a similar mapping and data collection effort that Virginia is doing right now, because frankly, the maps that are provided by the federal government are wholly inadequate, and funding decisions shouldn't be made without great data about really where broadband is and isn't. And so in Chicago, for instance, philanthropy played a huge role with underwriting the cost to connect 60,000 Chicago public school students by underwriting the cost for those low-income families to connect. $8 million was raised to put those families onto pretty good speed connections. Similar effort underwritten by Philanthropy in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We've had Philanthropy underwrite a computer equity network in the state of Illinois. There was an Illinois COVID fund that Philanthropy was involved in, and this was to set up a statewide computer equipment refurbishing and distribution effort, because in the state there was 1.1 million people that don't have access to a device. So whether you can help source those computers that are then wiped and refurbished, reloaded with Microsoft 10, and then distributed to low-income families, or whether you're in a position to hold distribution efforts in your communities. There are a lot of refurbishers around the country. I don't know of any specifically in Virginia, but I certainly do know there's a network of those people around. And finally, I do want to talk about this underwriting community planning and capacity building. You know, we're big believers in Illinois that if communities don't have a basic understanding of broadband and how it integrates with a community's economic development plan, they're really in not a great position to negotiate with local internet service providers, or in some cases, and I'm familiar enough with Virginia to know that in some counties there aren't local internet service providers. So you want to lure people to the table that may be working in counties or regions next to a completely underserved area. But communities need to get up to speed. They need to be able to articulate a strategic plan and then make decisions about broadband. So Philanthropy underwrote an effort in Illinois called Illinois Connected Communities, where these communities go through a 9-month planning process, and they come out at the end with a strategic action plan that can focus on access if that's not present in the community, or they can focus on adoption, which is really getting to that device, digital literacy and affordability problem. And then there's some communities that have both that are really focused on use. How can we use broadband specifically to advance goals? And so whether they're a healthcare institution or they're education groups, those are the kinds of organizations that want to drive broadband adoption, especially in the time of COVID. So I love this quote from my fellow in the trenches broadband philanthropy. The Blandon Foundation runs a statewide effort in Minnesota, and it's focused on rural communities. And as Bernadine says, it's not about broadband, it's about what broadband can do. Broadband is the means to the end. Internet access is fundamental to everything philanthropy cares about. And so my father used to say, if it's not your first issue, it damn well better be your second issue, because you can't deliver your services and what you can't support your organizations without the means to do so, and that is broadband right now. So Tamarah and Evan, maybe you might give some specific needs that you see in Virginia, or might reinforce some things on the list that we have here.
Yeah, happy to. So, you know, I think there's been some conversation in the chat about this. We have in Virginia a nascent effort that we're calling the Commonwealth Connect Fund, which is a state-led opportunity to connect publicly minded, corporate, philanthropic, and high net worth donors to communities that need additional support to make their universal broadband coverage happen. So while we have, as we've said, a tremendous volume of resources at the state level, we need every penny of those to do our side of getting the infrastructure built and getting the job done. Building a fiber network to nearly every Virginia location and then a wireless connection to the remainder is a tremendously complex and expensive undertaking. And the model that we've used is, we think, the only way to get it done, which is to support public-private partnerships with strong oversight and review at the state level. The challenge there, though, is if the public side of that public-private partnership is going to be able to stand up for citizen interests and ensure that the network that's constructed is a strong one and the one that meets the needs of its citizens, it's got to have skin in the game, and it's got to have staff capacity to be able to manage its side of the grant and not get taken for a ride in the course of that relationship. And so what we're hoping to do is, via that Commonwealth Connect Fund, connect funders to localities that have strong projects that are ready to roll in the course of their VADI applications. And so recognizing that a ton of philanthropies are interested in supporting this effort, but might not have on-staff network engineers, we will take that part of the burden on the state team. So we evaluate projects as they come in. We make sure that they're cost efficient, which, by the way, our program is running right around 3.5 times more cost efficient than comparable FCC programs. We also make sure that the technology is used well, that they're serving public needs, that community anchor institutions, et cetera, are getting connected. And then we'll put that list in front of people who've made pledges to the Commonwealth Connect Fund, and they can select which communities they want to be recipients of their pledged funds. We don't actually anticipate taking in any money at the state level. Rather, we'll share information, and then donations can go directly to support localities or regions as they build out their networks. And so, from our perspective, that's the best way for members of this network to join in supporting this effort. There are also a ton of other initiatives. If you really want to go a different way, if it's not a good fit, we can find other ways to plug you in. But right now, what we really are asking folks to do is put every shoulder to the wheel and make sure that we're supporting the low income and low capacity communities in joining with and engaging with the state's VADI program.
Hey, Evan, so the Connect Now Fund is great, and you're kind of qualifying projects for folks, and they can be put in front of various philanthropies to fund. When you make that, kind of matchmaking connection between the philanthropy and the locality, is it typically, all the money goes out immediately? Because obviously it's going to take some time to build out the network. Is it over a period of years, or how does that work?
So matching funds need to come in. These are capital intensive projects, and so most of the capital need is right up front. I will tell you that we don't. It'll depend on what. One of the challenges of this project has been that every network and every community is a custom build and a custom situation. There may be communities that could backfill, that could accept supporting donations on the back end. There are going to be others, though, that really need the resources up front so that they can actually undertake applying for and engineering the grant. We also, I want to be really clear that folks make a pledge, but that pledge is you're not signing in blood. If you want to withdraw, you can withdraw. If a community that you support doesn't make the cut this year, you can roll it over to next year. There are a lot of different ways in which we can play matchmaker and connect donor philanthropies or funders to the communities that each specific funder wants to serve.
And I would just add a little shameless promotion here that if a foundation wanted to give a gift over a certain number of years, but the locality needed the money right now, Virginia Community Capital would certainly love to entertain a request to bridge that gap until that money came in. We could fund it to the municipality. They could move forward with the project, and the foundation could pay us back over a time frame that suited them. Tamarah, any comments from you?
Sure. One of the things we've seen, which is one of the most innovative things, and we actually talked to some folks at VCC about this, some of our localities who've actually been awarded funding in previous rounds of VADI, some of their community residents actually want to establish funds to help their neighbors get connected and get their neighbors access to devices. So what we've seen is actually just residents in communities that just want to help their neighbors pool their money to help their other neighbors get connected. So we've seen that. We've also seen pieces around the adoption side. One of the biggest things we've heard of in Virginia, and I'm pretty sure this is an issue in other states, is while the school systems have been able to provide devices to school students, there are senior citizens who don't have access to devices to do their telehealth or telemedicine visits. So what we've seen is we've had communication with different, healthcare foundations and community foundations. I know one of the efforts we've seen actually in Portsmouth, Virginia, where they actually received some CARES Act funding to do some public Wi-Fi throughout the city, which also connected their public housing communities. They actually work with Eastern Shore Medical School, and the school provided devices to senior citizens who live in public housing so that they could still continue to monitor their blood pressure and things of that nature and report back to the medical students who are providing care to them. So we've seen where there's been different models of philanthropy through medical schools and community residents just wanting to help their neighbors get connected.
That's such a great point, Tamarah, because I do think that early CARES Act dollars were really targeted to the K through 12, and everybody thought kids needed devices, but they'd take them home and their parents needed the devices and the grandparents needed devices. And we found that it was a bit of, the seniors in particular were a bit of a forgotten section. And of course, when we all were supposed to be signing up for our COVID vaccines, how did they want people to do it? They wanted them to do it online, and people didn't have access to the devices or the skills. And in some cases, because these various sign up mechanisms were very, wonky, it was difficult for people to do that. So I would agree that seniors have been an ignored segment, and so maybe some philanthropies that are aiming their dollars at the elderly population, there's a real role to play that in terms of devices and skills. And I do think the other thing is healthcare institutions really are playing a huge role. I think South Carolina wouldn't have a broadband office if it weren't for a bunch of healthcare institutions literally pressing the state to get their act together and get going on that. So because of the pandemic, because rural communities are completely unserved with hospital closures and lack of specialists, telehealth and telemental health is the way to go. And so they've really been pushing hard to make sure that people particularly in rural areas or low-income areas are connected.
So,
Okay, I'm sorry.
Wayne, I have a question for them. If I'm not sure whether Evan or Tamarah want to address this, but so we know there were more applications than you all can process and focus on in 2021 into 2022, likely. So in terms of what happens next? So if philanthropy, do we just need to have our members need our members to kind of try to figure out which communities are up next for, maybe next on the plate where maybe they can play a role? Or how would you say the next best steps might be?
Sure, Patty. So I think the first thing to recognize is that, we've got $750 million that we can allocate this year. We got $960 million in requests. We will not be allocating $750 million worth of funds this year. Some percentage, right? And the scoring is still happening, but some percentage of applications are going to be rejected because they just don't make the cut this year. We've got to be really careful that our spending is commensurate with the amount of progress we're making on the project, because that 850 is it. That's as much as the Commonwealth is going to have to put toward this project. And so, what I would say is the first thing that funders should do is figure out which community, independent of what's happening with VADI right now, make a determination about which communities you want to serve if you're geographically bound, or if you've got specific commitments to specific regions. And then 2, figure out how much you have in the way of resources that you could devote. Then get into contact with us. Chandler Vaughn on our team can help coordinate that, and I can put his contact in the chat, or he can actually. I think he's on right now. But then we can get you connected. We can share all the documents. We can explain, the detailed nuts and bolts of how the Commonwealth Connect Fund works. But that's going to be the best vehicle to support broadband infrastructure deployment in Virginia. I will tell you that we're going to get a ton of progress done. We're going to make a ton of progress this year, but it is going to be a busy 3 years getting every single community a fully funded, engineered, and underway project to get to universal coverage by the end of 2024. There is no shortage of work to be done. There is no shortage of resources that are needed, even over and above the amount of money that we've been able to persuade the Commonwealth to put toward the project.
Okay, excellent. I'm monitoring the chat box for other questions that folks may have. I'm not seeing any. Katie or Patty, I'm not sure if you are either. But if anybody has a question, please put it in the chat box. We'll get that answered.
Yeah, Stephanie Randolph just asked, can you provide any examples of how impact investors are supporting broadband deployment? Thanks, Stephanie. That's a great question.
I'm not aware currently of a significant impact investment impact in Virginia or in other states, though. I mean, to be clear, I haven't looked in other states. I see Adrianne shaking her head, so it seems like that's not really happening. I will say we have a large number of small and medium-sized ISPs that are undertaking these projects, and they would welcome getting more value from an investor, I suspect. So, if they, these are for-profit entities, so an investor could expect to get a return. But if they're valued at X and an investor was willing to come in at X minus, 10% in terms of their expected return or whatever you negotiated out, there are a large number of internet service providers I know that would welcome that kind of investment. There may even be, and I suspect there are, in both the private sector and the quasi-private sector, by which I mean the electric cooperatives, who are also hugely important partners. They would be willing to undertake, they can't really take on investment, but they could certainly accept very favorably termed debt, which can mimic an impact investment. And I know that there are a lot of them that are working really hard to bridge this capital gap. And while they can get pretty favorable debt issuance from the federal government, a lot of that relies on them acting as an electric cooperative rather than them acting as what they have to do to deploy broadband, which is acting as a for-profit subsidiary. And so, if somebody has a specific impact investment proposal or idea, we'd be happy to talk that through with you and figure out how to best connect you to people who'd be interested in it. We can do some more matchmaking. We often joke that we're sort of like eHarmony for broadband. Anybody who's got resources to put toward the effort will find a good home for them.
There you go. That's
Hey,
good.
Wayne, I wanted to make a shameless plug for our partnership on my old hat. So opportunity zones are actually a vehicle in which someone could invest in a broadband company versus a project to help them with building out broadband. Wayne, I'll make a shameless plug because VCC is actually a great partner of our agency and working on Opportunity Zone. And I know that my other hat, as part of the Appalachian Regional Commission Program Manager for Virginia, there's a great project that was funded less than 30 days ago around opportunity zones, at least within the Appalachian region of Virginia. But there are plenty other opportunities. So Wayne, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the work around OZ.
Yeah, we're still very much involved in opportunity zones and looking. We're a bit of a matchmaker too. We go out, find projects, including projects like this, and then go find the investors, and would certainly welcome. We have a database of projects in our shop, the Virginia Opportunity Fund shop, and would love to talk more about that. If anybody has interest, let me know. And I'll put my email address on the chat, and we will, and if it's geographic specific, we can also go into our database and sort by geography as well. So thank you, Tamarah, for doing that.
Jerry, Wayne, I was
yes.
going to make a point about what I would call how to put moneyed partnerships together to accomplish a number of different goals. And we've been tracking some projects, one in North Carolina and one in Colorado, where in North Carolina, this group worked with Wake Forest and its county, the town of Wake Forest and its county. And what they did was they got money, or they've applied for money from a fund from the Federal Communications Commission aimed at historically Black universities. There's also tribal colleges and minority serving institutions where funds are going in to these institutions to do broadband in these unserved and underserved areas. And there's a workforce development piece that is tied to this. So again, a lot of foundations might say, well, I'm interested in workforce and community development, and can find ways to bring their money to the table with funds that either come from the state or local. So in this case, in North Carolina, there were both local and regional funding, an application to the FCC for this particular HBCU, and then funding from private philanthropy with workforce development. And then this same group worked in Colorado around forest fire management. So again, that's all we've been reading about is what's going on out west. And so this county, which had been unfortunately blighted by this gigantic forest fire last year, has tied workforce, forest fire management, and broadband together into a project that's funded by a variety of parties. So I think people need to be very expansive about how they bring that public-private money together. And I will say how impressed I am with what Virginia is doing, because there are not a lot of states that help localities with seeking funds at the federal level, as well as the kind of application heavy help that they're giving localities. And believe me, as I said before, a lot of states are just not doing that. So communities are really struggling with how to navigate all of these various pots of funding. So congratulations to the team.
Thank you, Adrianne. I want to get to one of Jerry's comments. He was talking about, and somebody mentioned the two facets of access. One is coverage, and then the second is affordability. I think, Adrianne, you may have talked about that. Jerry's comment is, we're gonna focus on coverage for a little bit longer, but then we do need to focus on affordability. Are there models, Adrianne or Evan or Tamarah, that you have seen to help with affordability? Do you have any best practices there?
Well, I think as Evan pointed out, there are not very many state programs that are subsidizing on the affordability front. Right. And so Illinois did do a big study about identifying the problem, but I think that the state legislature, like Illinois, is very focused, like Virginia, on the infrastructure piece. So there has been a foundation, it's called Heartland Forward, and it's Walmart money, that underwrote publicizing the emergency broadband benefit program. So there have been about 5 million signups. This is a fund that is now providing a $50 a month subsidy to low-income people and to people whose income was affected by COVID. And the problem has been, to some degree, that people don't know about it. And so the enrollment has been a little slower than anticipated. And so Heartland Forward stepped up. And obviously, you're not going to publicize a a affordability program using the internet. So they took out radio and television ads. They did some door hangers and other sort of ways to meet people where they are to try to get them aware of this $50 subsidy. So if broadband's costing between $60 and $72 in the United States on average, then $50 goes a really long way to making it affordable for people. So I think trying to get people aware of these federal programs, Lifeline is another program that's administered by the Federal Communications Commission that's been primarily used for telephones. The bulk of that money, it's $10 a month. And so people use it to, and generally they could use it for broadband, but most people use it for cell phone. So I think it's really a question of making people aware of what's out there and then helping them with the signups. So again, in Illinois, Philanthropy is underwriting efforts to literally tutor people in how to sign up for these programs, because I do think there's a big divide between making people aware and then actually helping them get online and stay online and understand how the program works. There's a suspicion about the word free. When Chicago, seriously, when Chicago did this CPS program and they said, okay, families, sign up for this and it's free, you cannot imagine how many people did not sign up. And it took these trusted local community-based organizations to work with people one-on-one to sign them up and understand they weren't going to get a bill in 12 months, right?
Yeah, I'll share. Adrianne's completely right, and we're very frustrated with the nature of the federal programs. You know, it's the emergency broadband benefit unfortunately is time limited, so that $50 subsidy goes away. It also is it's akin to fumbling on the 1 yard line, right? I mean, they got it almost right, and then they put the burden on low-income households that already have too much to do to be aware of this federal benefit, to know their eligibility, and then to advocate for their eligibility in that program with the customer service reps from a for-profit ISP. That's just not going to work. And so, you know, we right now in Virginia we're going to be submitting a report. We ran a very, very, very small pilot through our Department of Social Services. We're hoping to put together the infrastructure necessary for DSS here in Virginia to be the payer to the ISPs and the beneficiary management entity on behalf of eligible Virginians in the same way they draw down federal funds through other programs. We do anticipate needing a waiver from FCC for that to work. The way the federal program is structured right now, it doesn't anticipate that. But we do think that with the ability of our Department of Social Services to both be a reliable payer for the ISPs and aggregate demand for the ISPs, we think we can get a set of internet service providers, particularly since we're subsidizing the connection to the home, that will be willing to take service at the federally provided rate. We got to ground test that though. You know, that's a belief right now. I think it's very likely at $50. The new infrastructure package contemplates a $30 a month subsidy. I think that's going to be a much, much harder sell with a set of internet service providers. And so, you know, there may be a gap to fill between what the federal subsidy is and what the end of the line bill is from ISPs that philanthropies could serve. But I think ultimately what we're going to need to do is this infrastructure bill, if and when it passes, will be very good. But long term, we're going to need the feds to step up and create a low income benefit at least the $50 level for every low and moderate income American. It's the only realistic way we can do it. We already do it with heating assistance. We do it with food assistance. This is a critical service, and we just need to do it.
You know, Evan, I love the fumble at the 1 yard line. That's a great analogy. You know, there are, as you point out, families that are enrolled in SNAP should automatically be enrolled in the emergency broadband benefit. And it's crazy that these agencies, somehow these databases aren't talking to each other. And this is something that we're advocating for at the federal level. Of course, some of these databases are at the state level. And so the question is how to coordinate all this and make it easy for people.
Well, and that's our thing. And we want to lead the way. I mean, our team at the Department of Social Services, they already work with the SNAP households, right? They know where they are. They know who they are. They have a relationship with these families. Just give us a waiver. Let us administer these funds on their behalf and negotiate out connectivity for them. And we can get a lot done. And then we can show the way for the rest of the nation and ultimately the federal government to figure it out.
And I just wanted to add a point. One of the things we've seen, at least in the body program, so while we're working on solving the digital divide from an infrastructure standpoint, we do require, as part of the public-private partnership, an agreement between the ISP and these units of local government. So what we've seen in some cases where a provider does not offer, and we do, just so you will know, as part of the evaluation criteria, we do score around digital equity. What are some efforts that the partnership or whether it's the locality or unit of local government, whether it's the ISP, are doing to ensure that low to moderate income residents have access within Virginia? And what we've seen is, as part of that agreement between the public entity and the private entity, some of them are going, well, you don't offer a low cost program. You're going to need to if you're going to come partner with us on this body project, because we want to make sure our low income residents. So we've actually seen that on several body applications where the ISP does not offer it traditionally through their normal course of business, but because they want to get that supplemental funding to build out a network for expansion, the localities are saying, as part of our partnership, you've got to do this. So we've seen that on the body side, and the EBB has been an added value to that, because while the ISP is providing a low cost plan, which they normally wouldn't, now you've got EBB as a resource. And as you all have said, it's not a perfect solution, but it's something that we can work with right now.
Tamarah, that's kind of related to one of the questions in the chat from Andy about the private right-of-way issue with the electric co-ops and Dominion as it relates to the grants that you're reviewing now. How does that play into your decision making?
So I'm probably going to kick that over to Evan, just because in the projects that we funded, we have not seen this as an issue that's been a hindrance for our projects. But Evan, I know that there's been some discussion on the policy side. But for the projects we've recently awarded, I'm not aware that that's been a hindrance on our ability to do expansion. But Evan, do you want to take that one?
Okay, Evan.
The right-of-way problem, I mean, it certainly adds cost and complexity when we've got to deal with new rights of way. One of the reasons we were really happy with our partnerships with Dominion and Appalachian Power is that they generally already have pretty comprehensive easement agreements. And so where they can build out middle mile and then do a handoff, in a convenient location to a last mile provider, that works very well. It also saves us some costs. There is a lawsuit right now. A crotchety individual is suing an electric cooperative for doing a community service and trying to provide broadband to that person and their neighbors. We'll see how that lawsuit goes. I don't really know what damages you have when your property value has been increased and you've got an 11th wire on the poles that are already on your property. But we will see how that turns out. There have also been issues related to rail crossings and some highway crossings that we took a while to iron out with VDOT, but we're pretty much there now. Ultimately, though, if you got to engineer around a right-of-way problem, you just engineer around it. It adds cost and a little time. We've built some of that in. The broader issue around labor availability and supply availability is a challenge. We have a bit of an advantage in Virginia having such a robust program that we're going to kind of steal a march on our sister states here. We will be deploying hundreds of millions of dollars into projects this year, which will mean that we'll be able to gather up a bunch of the talent and material ahead of activity by other states that are not quite as ready. But starting next year and the year thereafter, I anticipate us being in pretty ferocious price competition for talent and material.
And I think that answers the second question from Andy about kind of the supply chain and employment issues and challenges. So Thank you for doing that.
You know, I do want to say, here's another role for philanthropy, and Evan alluded to it. There is a shortage of good consultants in the engineering and needs assessment space. There are a lot of people getting in that frankly don't know what they're doing. They smell, you know, money, it's like sharks in the water, you know, and so there are some unscrupulous people out there. And I think there's sort of a need to train people to get in this field and to, you know, help communities with the kinds of pre-market development, you know, research and community needs assessment, surveying, mapping, asset mapping that, you know, is usually what you have to do before you make an application. So I think that Evan's really right. The people who have the funds, who are moving ahead with these projects, are going to have a lot of muscle to hoover up this kind of resource. And so again, good point, Evan.
Yeah, Adrianne, I know I sit through some of the grant prep sessions that Tamarah and DHCD put on, and I was amazed at the level of detail that some of those required, and it was definitely an engineering intensive. I'm going to stop there and ask the panelists for any closing thoughts before we turn it back over to Katie for next steps. Just take you know, a minute or two and you know, share with the group any closing thoughts that you have. Adrianne?
Well, if Robbie can maybe throw up my final slide, it's a great quote. I think it's a really wonderful way to end at least what I would have said, which is that, you know, this is really about offering everybody the ability to connect regardless of where they live, who they are, and to empower all people using the network. We always say it's not the answer to every problem, but you just cannot address the greatest challenges, those that the philanthropists on this call care about, without it. So that is my final thought for everybody.
All right, that's a good one. It is certainly critical. Tamarah?
How do you expect me to follow that, Wayne?
I know. Do you have a nice quote like that?
No, I don't, but now I'm going to borrow it and put it as my email signature. Thank you, Adrianne.
Yeah.
No, seriously, there is a role for philanthropy to play within the Commonwealth of Virginia's effort to expand broadband, whether it's to help communities with what we're checking the box now around access around infrastructure, or whether it's checking the box on the adoption side of it and making sure folks actually have access in their home and businesses. With that, I'm gonna kick it back over to Evan, because I'm pretty sure he's gonna end us on a good note.
All right, Evan.
Well, you know, I want to end us on a good note. I think the reality is that, as I said, while there's a great deal of work left to be done, it's gonna get done. I have a lot of confidence in the group of people on this call. I have a lot of confidence in my colleagues in state government. I have a lot of confidence in the General Assembly, and I have a lot of confidence in our partners in building this infrastructure. We're going to get every Virginian online. And the reason I'm confident is because of the interest we're seeing here, because of the number of people who want to get engaged with this effort. So do some thinking. Figure out how you can best plug in with our efforts, and let's make Virginia the first state in the union to get to universal coverage.
Okay, that's a good closing statement. I want to thank all the panelists again, Adrianne and Tamarah and Evan. I think it's been great that Adrianne has provided a nice overview and kind of a national perspective on what's going on and the overall importance of connectivity and affordability. And to Tamarah and Evan, I just feel so lucky to live in Virginia. I feel like that, I mean, I know I've sat in on some of the DHCD sessions, and they're really, really good. And so, you know, you guys are doing a great job. at the state level and working with localities. And I hope now that the Virginia Funders Network will, be curious, ask some questions, make a phone call. Let's talk about it. Certainly, if Virginia Community Capital can play a role, we want to help that. We understand the importance of broadband to creating a vibrant community. So thank you, panelists. And Katie, I'll turn it over to you for next steps and final comments.
Thanks so much, Wayne, for moderating that panel. You did it adeptly. Adrianne, Evan, and Tamarah, thank you so much for joining us today. We so appreciate your expertise. It was a very engaging conversation on a really important issue and such an opportunity for the Commonwealth. I just want to highlight that this is the first session in our two-part broadband learning series. I put the registration link in the chat, and you can register for the second session, which is going to be on November 3rd. And that session is going to really bring to life some of the things that we talked about here today. We're going to have a handful of funders that are going to be joining us. Clark Castile from the Danville Regional Foundation is going to be our moderator for that session. And we're going to include Truist, the Harvest Foundation, the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation as some of our panelists there. And they're going to talk about how their foundations and their organizations are supporting broadband implementation in their own communities. We're also going to have Christopher Alley, who is a UVA professor, has received funding from the Benton Institute. Thank you, Adrianne, for y'all's support. He's got a book out. It's called Farm Fresh Broadband, and it's the politics of rural connectivity. So he's going to set the stage for us a little bit, which will be great to hear what he's learned through his research. So that's on November 3rd. Please join us for that. And then also want to highlight two other upcoming events that VFN has that you might be interested in. One is a project that we've been working on for 6 months, which is a field scan of the policy, advocacy, and community organizing groups that are working in Virginia and the funders who are funding policy and advocacy in the state. We're going to release a new publication of that field scan and have a panel discussion with some funders who are already using policy and advocacy strategies to advance their missions. That's on October 26th. We'll hope you'll join us. It's going to be a really great session. As we all know, philanthropy does not have enough grant dollars to address the intractable issues that we're all working on. So using strategies beyond dollars, such as policy and advocacy and community organizing, are really key to making sure we're advancing our missions. And then November 17th will be VFN's very first annual business meeting and 1-year anniversary celebration. We hope you'll join us for that. And if you register by the end of October, we're going to send you a small gift just to celebrate and mark our 1-year anniversary as an organization. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you again really soon on one of our upcoming events. Thanks, everybody.